Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the conversation with Dr. Tayari Jones session at Abu Dhabi International Book Fair. My name is Ahlam Baluki, and I'm the director of the Emirates Airline Festival of Literature, and I am delighted and honored to be moderating this session today. It gives me great pleasure to welcome New York Times bestselling author Dr. Tayari Jones, the author of 4 novels, most recently An American Marriage. Published in 2018, An American Marriage is on Oprah's book club selection and also appeared on Barack Obama's summer reading list, as well as his year-end roundup. The novel was awarded the Women's Prize for Fiction, formerly known as the Orange Prize, Aspen Words Prize, and NAACP Image Award. It has been published in 24 countries. Dr. Jones, a 2021 Guggenheim Fellow, has also been a recipient of the Hurston Wright Legacy Award, United States Artist Fellowship, NEA Fellowship, and Radcliffe Institute Bunting Fellowship. Her third novel, Silver Sparrow, was awarded the NEA Big Read Library of Classics in 2016. Dr. Jones is a graduate of Spelman College, University of Iowa, and Arizona State University. She's an Andrew D. White Professor at Large at Cornell University and the Charles Howard Candler Professor of Creative Writing at Emory University. Welcome, Tayari.
Thank you for having me. It's so nice to see you again.
It's wonderful seeing you again. I always feel like it's one of my life's greatest pleasures to be able to read books that touch me so deeply and then get a chance to discuss it with authors. And it is such a gift to be able to speak to you today. How are you?
I'm doing well. What about you? How are things there?
Yeah, things are, and I think in the UAE, things are opening back up and, more and more so. The vaccination rollout's going really well. So I think we're in one of the luckier parts of the world to be living. So really, I miss the times when you were here at our festival and we were just, we had crowds of people and book signings and so many people in the audience. And I really hope that our world can heal so that we can go back to that.
You have expressed my feelings exactly. Things are opening up here, but where I live, things never quite closed down. So it was always very nervous here.
Yeah. But how's it been for your art? Because, has it given you more time to create, or is it difficult to feel inspired in a time where, all of these overwhelming issues around the world arise and they just consume us so much?
At the beginning, I thought that, oh, this will give me time to write. I'll be, in my home and I'll have, no one is distracting me. But what I discovered that my own thoughts are a greater distraction than anything else. And I had to really ask myself, what is the value of literature? Because when people are dying, not just the pandemic, we had all this, racial unrest here in the US, it felt kind of silly to sit around my home and play around in my imagination. I felt almost like when I was trying to write fiction, I was a little girl playing with dolls when, when the world was on fire. And I had to really take stock and ask myself, what is my contribution to the world? How do I make it? And I believe in my heart that writing and literature is in fact my contribution, but it cannot be my only contribution. I felt that I had to go out and do things to help people who were in immediate need.
Right. And as an author, I can imagine that this time puts that pressure on you in that that you need to write for impact more than write purely for the purpose of bringing to life a beautiful story.
Well, yes, I mean, you have to write more for impact, but also as a novelist, from the time I have an idea until the book is in someone's hand, that is often years away. Right. So it was almost as though the house is on fire and I'm saying, oh, I'm going to send a fire truck. It'll arrive in 2 years.
Right.
So I had to do other things. Like, for example, I sent money to the young people who had been imprisoned for demonstrating against police violence. I felt that money, that somewhere in Minnesota, there's a young person who doesn't know how he's going to get out of jail. And I got him out of jail that night. Wow. And that to me felt more meaningful than anything that I was doing in my notebook.
For sure. And I definitely feel like all over the world right now, nobody can afford to just sit back and watch, you know, particularly if you are lucky enough to have a job that sustains you and brings you an income, contributing, giving back, and volunteering your time and yourself in some way to help whatever cause that it is. God knows, you know, there's so much that needs everyone's help and support right now. It's almost like everybody has, you know, what their life is on a normal basis, and then there's this other responsibility of being a human being that the planet needs right now.
Yes, and often that gift will be something for which you will never get any credit. Like the thing about when you write a novel or you write an article, you know, it has your name on it and everyone associates you with this idea, with this act of writing. If you use writing as resistance, people know you did it. But right now is a time when we can't be concerned about whether or not we're getting shine or attention. The only thing we can think about now is, will this help?
Right. And are you feeling hopeful?
You know, I am now. The vaccination really, it helped a lot, but more important than vaccinating myself is that when I was able to get my parents are in their 80s. And, you know, the older people in society, they really felt like they did not have a year to waste.
No.
Like little children and older people, a year is so much time. For children, if you've only been alive 5 years, you can't imagine sitting 1 year out. And if you're very old and you don't know how many years you have left, every day that you've wasted, it just is a tragedy. So I had to move heaven and earth to get my parents vaccinated. I was willing to do whatever it took. And that was when, for me, a weight was lifted when my parents got their vaccine.
Yeah. Definitely. I know I feel the same with everybody in my family. So I really hope that our world will heal very, very soon and that we can all be reunited in person.
Yes.
You know, it's great speaking to you on Zoom and virtually, but when you were here, it was a completely different feeling, and just being face to face with all of your readers in our region, I think it means a lot to everyone who reads your book, interacts with your work. And I do want to start talking about your work. And I read your work backwards. So I read An American Marriage in 2019, and it was my favorite book that I read in that year. I have to say, I always say this. And and then I read Silver Sparrow in the lead up to this talk. So I read it in the last couple of weeks, and I love the first line of Silver Sparrow, where you say, you know, my father, James Witherspoon, is a bigamist. And, you know, when you read that, there is no way you're not finishing this book to the last page, right? It's the kind of first sentence that grips you instantly. I wanted to ask you, what does an author need to give a reader in the first line or in the first few lines to grip them all the way to the end?
Well, here is my secret for that. The first line is never the first thing that I write. Because when I'm working on a novel, I don't know the novel yet. So I don't know what the first line is. It's not until I've completed it that I ask myself, okay, self, what is this book about? And you try to encapsulate that in the first line. But a lot of people, they're hoping so hard for a great first line that they can't get started because you don't know the first line yet. And that's the thing. The novel is not written in order, but because of editing and rewriting, it feels like it was written in order. But the first sentence should also my little rule is that the first sentence should always make the reader ask 3 questions. So her first line is, my father, James Witherspoon, is a bigamist. So you want to say, really? Who else is he married to? Does she know? Does he get caught? Those are the 3 questions.
Oh, amazing. That's a great tip. Can we maybe read a couple of lines, maybe from page 6?
Okay.
Well, just to give everybody who's here a bit of context about what the story is about.
I'm looking at which cover do you have? Which book?
I have this one.
Oh, that is the first American edition, and this is the one from the UK.
Oh, I love
it. Pretty.
Yeah, so pretty. I love both covers.
Okay, I'll read. This is from page 6 when Dana, this is when she discovers that her family is unusual. When did I first discover that although I was an only child, my father was not my father and mine alone? I really can't say. It's something that I've known for as long as I've known that I had a father. I can only say for sure when I learned that this type of double duty daddy wasn't ordinary. I was about 5 years old in kindergarten when the art teacher, Miss Russell, asked us to draw pictures of our families. While all the other children scribbled with their crayons or soft-leaded pencils, I used a blue ink pen and drew James, Charisse, and Laverne. In the background was Raleigh, my father's best friend, the only person we knew from his other life. This was years and years ago, but I still remember. I hung a necklace around the wife's neck. I gave the girl a big smile stuffed with square teeth. Near the left margin, I drew my mother and me standing by ourselves. The art teacher approached me from behind. Now, who are these people you've drawn so beautifully? Charmed, I smiled up at her. My family, my daddy has 2 wives and 2 girls. Cocking her head, she said, I see. I didn't think that much more about it. I was still enjoying the memory of the way she pronounced beautifully. To this day, when I hear anyone say that word, I feel loved. At the end of the month, I brought all my drawings home in a cardboard folder. James opened up his wallet, which he kept plump with $2 bills to reward me for my schoolwork. I saved the portrait, my masterpiece, for last, being as it was so beautifully drawn and everything. My father picked the page up from the table and held it close to his face like he was looking for a message. Mother stood behind me, crossed her arms over my chest, and bent to place a kiss on the top of my head. It's okay, she said. Did you tell your teacher who was in the picture? James wanted to know. I nodded slowly the whole time, thinking that I probably should lie, although I wasn't quite sure why. James, Mother said, let's not make a molehill into a mountain. She's just a child. Gwen, he said, this is important. Don't look so scared. I'm not going to take her out behind the woodshed. Then he chuckled, but my mother didn't laugh. All she did was draw a picture. Kids draw pictures. Go on in the kitchen, Gwen, James said. Let me talk to my daughter. My mother said, why can't I stay here? She's my daughter too. He said, you're with her all the time. You tell me I don't spend enough time talking to her, so let me talk. Mother hesitated, then released me. She's just a little kid, James. She doesn't even know the ins and outs yet. Trust me, James said. She left the room, but I don't know that she trusted him not to say something that would leave me wounded and broken winged for life. I could see it in her face. When she was upset, she moved her jaw around invisible gum. Dana, come here. James was wearing a Navy chauffeur's uniform. Come closer, he said. I hesitated, looking to the space in the doorway where Mother had disappeared. Dana, he said, you're not afraid of me, are you? You're not scared of your own father, are you? His voice sounded mournful, but I took it as a dare. No, sir, I said, taking a bold step forward. I shrugged. My mother told me that I should always call him sir. With a sudden motion, he reached for me and lifted me on his lap. He spoke to me with both our faces looking outward. Dana, he said, I can't have you making drawings like the one you made for your art class. I can't have you doing things like that. What goes on in this house between your mother and me is grown people's business. I love you, you're my baby girl, and I love you. But what we do in this house has to be kept a secret. Oh, I said, your other wife and your other girl is a secret? He put me down from his lap so we could look each other in the face. No, he said, you've got it the wrong way around. Dana, you are the one that's the secret.
Wow. And so there's this mother and daughter pair. So there's one mother and daughter that know about the other mother and daughter. So one pair have him most of the time, almost all of the time, and he is their full-time husband, full-time dad. And then the other pair have him for a very little amount of time, but they know his truth. They know that they are the second family and the first family exists. Who do you think had it better?
Well, it depends on if you mean on a material level, on a spiritual level. I mean, his daughter from his first family, she lives a normal life. So she did not grow up with anyone ever telling her that she is a secret. And that is invaluable. I think the nurturing you receive in childhood, it's so important. But I do think that there's an argument to be made that the person who knows the truth is in a better position because it is always better to live a truth than a lie. but I can't decide, because also when it comes to privilege, there is no privilege that compares to being accepted by your family.
Right. And I noticed that sometimes she calls him James and sometimes she calls him Daddy, and it alternates. And I think that's a reflective of how she feels on the inside, and how how she relates herself to him throughout the story.
So many people live in very compromised situations, particularly when it comes to their fathers, because men can start a new family and they can have different roles. Like women tend to have all their children with them, and your mother is your mother, but fatherhood almost is kind of optional. And so they all live in this world where they're hoping to be chosen by their father. So that relationship is not unconditional. And so much of the relationship depends on his relationship with their mother.
Right. And in both of your books, I mean, Silver Sparrow, half of the book is from the perspective of Dana, the second daughter, or the second wife's daughter, but she was born first. And then the second half of the book is from the perspective of Tayaris. And you've done that in American Marriage as well, where you change the narrator throughout your stories. Why is that important for you to do in your sort of writing style?
One, I enjoy it. Part of it is just the pleasure that I get from doing the different voices. But secondly, like in Silver Sparrow, I had actually planned to write the entire book from the point of view of Dana, but I wanted to know what was going on in James's other house. And Dana was not in a position to tell me. So I had to get someone into the story who could tell me what was going on over there. And just like Dana, I was surprised at how dull his house was. Just imagine when you imagine someone else's place and you've just fantasized about it so much, you don't expect them to just have a simple table with 4 chairs, ordinary refrigerator.
Yeah.
I was as disappointed as she was. I don't know what I thought was going on over there.
Yeah, I mean, because they've always felt second best. They've always felt like they have to hide their identities in their lives because of the other family. And so the other family is always so lucky from their perspective.
Yes, you think they're eating ice cream for breakfast, like they just have it made.
Yeah, no, it was definitely interesting to see both perspectives. And I always find that in all of the characters in both books, you always, I mean, I can never tell who's in the right and who's in the wrong. It's like everybody's well-meaning, well-intentioned or well-meaning people who are in complicated circumstances, and then their lives make them behave in certain ways. But I never feel like any of the characters that like I want to demonize them, or I feel like this person is so wrong in the situation. Your writing is really good in doing that. Is that intentional in that you want everybody to have a good point?
Well, when I write a novel, it takes me 3 years to write a novel. I cannot spend time in a novel with people that I don't like or respect, because I have to spend so much time. You experience people's lives vicariously when you read, but even more so when you write. And if you have a well-rounded character, you have to see their entire perspective. Even James, the bigamist, I had to ask myself, okay, how is it that James explains himself to himself? And he explains himself like this. James says, every time a woman has come to me and she has said she's having my baby, I have married her. I have left no woman unmarried. And that is the thing that he prides himself on. And in a way, he has a point. So if I can't find a character's point, I just won't put them in a book.
It's the same from a reader's perspective as well. I mean, you don't want to read a character that you're constantly irritated with for a very long time. I mean, it's part of what makes the story so gripping in every step of the way. So I definitely appreciate that as a reader. And there's a part in the book that for me was really interesting. So Dana's grown up and she's the secret daughter, and she's dating this older boy, Marcus. And her mom's been doing night shifts, so she's been sneaking out to see Marcus at night. And then this one night, her dad and her uncle come in, and her dad wants to talk to her, and telling her like, where are you going dressed like this, and who are you seeing? And he kind of calls her out, and then she comes back and challenges him in that moment where she says, well, I'm going out with Marcus, and well, if you want to stop me, then come out and stop me, knowing that he is, he's like, I'm telling you, don't you step outside this house. And then she says, well, come and stop me. And in her mind, she's looking at him. She goes out and she's like, I dare you, James, come outside. And in a way, she wants him to come out, but she knows he won't. And I thought that was such a powerful scene, in that she took charge of the narrative for once, and she kind of shifted the power dynamic in that moment.
And he comes, and it shows how he is also imprisoned by this arrangement he's made. He can't step out the house to stop her because he can't be identified as her father. Mm-hmm. Because parenting is in some ways a matter of performance. It's a public act. And he cannot, as Dana says, he cannot love her in public. So he cannot stop her. Mm-hmm. She can be outdoors and he cannot. So he's cloistered. He can just be mad. He's mad too. He's just mad.
Yeah, I thought it was a great scene. Like I got to that point and I was like, this is so interesting, this moment where she took charge of the situation.
Yes, but also it's to her own detriment, because she doesn't need to be with that boy. See, so there's no good. She took charge. It's like she escaped. She took charge of her father only to run to someone else who takes charge of her.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And both of the girls, I think, struggled a lot from the situations they were in, and their characters were so built based on their upbringings and their relationship with their fathers in so many ways.
And it's just difficult to be a teenage girl for anyone. It's so hard to be a teenager.
Definitely. It really is. And so, like, I have a sister, and who is my whole entire heart, like you say. I love in your acknowledgement where you say my sister is my whole entire heart, and I wrote, you wrote this book for her. And I love that, Silver Sparrow's your most personal work, and that it had such a strong sisterhood narrative. And no matter what happens, and I know that society tells these two girls that they have to behave in certain ways and act in certain ways, whether that's to be loyal to their mothers, whether that's, possessiveness of their fathers, or who's going to win this battle in the end. But they were so drawn to each other throughout the story in different moments, and it was like a force inside of them that was sort of drawing them to each other despite their realities. Why was it important for you to write this story and to write this book for your sister?
I have two older sisters, and they were born before my parents ever laid eyes on each other. My sister is about 10, one is 10, one is 11 years older than me. And we didn't grow up together. We lived entirely separate lives. Like I said, my father is not a bigamist. They were born before my parents met, but they lived entirely separate. We lived across the country from each other, and I seldom saw them, but I always held particularly my oldest sister, I always held her in my heart, and I always thought about her. And for me, it was like I had a sister and I didn't have a sister. Like I had a sister who lived in my peripheral vision, and when I would turn my head, there was no one there. And as I got older, I started really thinking, okay, well, what is my role? We weren't reared together. We never saw each other, but that doesn't mean we can't be sisters, that we of the second generation, we can heal the mess that our parents made if we want to. Mm-hmm. And so when I was about 18, I started reaching out to my sister, and she warmed up to me. At first, she wasn't that into it, but if you know me at all, I will not be denied. And I was going to have me a sister. And she actually calls me sister, like it's my name. She says, hello, sister. And I say, hello, sister. And having made that relationship is like a great gift of my life. And then I wrote this book for her. And it was because I wrote it for her that I was able to keep writing, because I had a very difficult road to publication with this book. It almost didn't happen, but I kept writing it because I said, am I writing this book for a publisher? Am I writing this book for Maxine? And so I just kept moving forward for her.
That's beautiful. And I love that you were able to get that relationship with your sister eventually.
Me too.
It's such an unbreakable bond. I talking about your publishing journey. I was curious on, because the third book, Silver Sparrow, was the one which was the start of your big success, and then American Marriage was huge as well. And then, so I was curious why you think that was. Was it because you found your voice in that book, or was there a difference in your writing at that point, or was it purely a publisher's, link of which publisher you were associated with? Why was that?
I think these things are a little bit mysterious. You can make a case for the fact that I had a different publisher. You could make a case that I think I have grown as a writer. Absolutely. I think it matters that when I was a debut, it was a very different time in the US. It was the year 2002 when I wrote my first book. And that was not a very good time for African-American writers. Like at that time, they would, the powers that be, now I sound like a conspiracy theorist, but the powers would choose basically two Black writers of a generation, like a boy and a girl. And if you weren't that person, you weren't that person.
Right.
But I took a lot of strength from the readers I did have. My books were primarily read by African-American women in book clubs, and they were so kind to me, and I felt sustained, even though I didn't have a big career. I was loved. They would send me gifts in the mail. Like I moved to the North where it's very cold, and someone sent me a blanket she had knitted herself. And this sustained me, and I kept writing for them. But times changed. By the year 2011, when Silver Sparrow was published for the first time, things had become a little looser, a little bigger. I mean, I still wasn't being reviewed by, say, the New York Times, but I had a little more room. I was growing, and I kept writing. And then by the time An American Marriage was published, I do believe that books have to find their right time. I don't believe An American Marriage is about a man who has been wrongfully convicted. If it had been published 5 years earlier when it was due, I think if it had been published during the Obama years, it would not have been as successful, because during the Obama years, there was not so much appetite for Black people writing about systemic racism.
Right.
There was a sense of like, you got your president, what more do you want? Yeah. But it came out during Trump years when people were more curious about literature as resistance. So I think it was my best writing, and it was the right book at the right time.
And all of the stars had to align. and
you just, as a writer, I always tell people, because people often say, do you feel angry about that your other books weren't better received? But I don't, because I enjoyed writing my other books. I feel if you write because it is your calling and it's what fulfills you, who can be angry about being fulfilled?
Of course. Definitely. And so I want to talk about An American Marriage, and I love this. I know the story, but I'd love you to tell it for everyone who's here, where the idea for the characters of Celeste and Roy came from.
Well, I was at Harvard doing research on this topic, and I had done all this research, and I learned a lot, but I didn't have a story. I felt almost like I was trying to set statistics to music. That is not art, and I didn't know how to get from here to there. Because a novel, if it's to be any good, is going to be about people and their problems, not problems and their people. So I had a problem, I didn't have any people. But I was in a shopping mall trying to just kind of comfort myself, because I was so anxious about how little progress I was making, despite the fact that I was working so hard. And I saw a couple. They were in love and in trouble. The woman was fabulously dressed, shoes, bag, hair, lashes. She looked great. And the man, he looked okay. Wasn't anything wrong with him, but he did not look like she looked. They looked like visitors from two different worlds, but they were in love and in trouble. And I heard her say, she said, "Roy, you would not have waited on me for 7 years." And I looked at him, I looked at her, they looked at me, and I thought we all three agreed that he would not have waited on her for 7 years. But then he turned to her and he said, "I don't know what you're talking about. This would not have happened to you in the first place." And he was also right. And that's when I had the idea to write about a couple separated by a wrongful conviction, because you have a novel when you have two people who disagree, but they're both right.
Right. And So he's wrongfully incarcerated 18 months after they were married. And
Yes.
I want to talk with you about those first 18 months. What kind of relationship do they have before the incident? What kind of couple are Celeste and Roy?
Well, they're upwardly mobile. She's an artist. He's a businessman. He wants to maybe be her business manager, and they have trouble in their marriage. I always think it's very important that you have to write your characters as though they do not know that they're in a book. Had they known they were in a book, I think they would have behaved better because they would know that soon he's going to be wrongfully imprisoned and they need to be a model of matrimony. But they don't know that he's about to be wrongfully convicted. They just think they're two kind of volatile young people in love. And then he's incarcerated for a crime she knows he doesn't commit. And they don't have such a solid foundation upon which to build their relationship. They just have an average foundation.
Yeah. So, and then he's taken to jail. He's an innocent man. He didn't commit the crime. And then he starts to write to his wife, and she writes back to him. And there's something so intimate about reading other people's letters. And one of my favorite lines is, I thought it was so romantic in the beginning. I was like, I know this is not like meant to be a romantic book necessarily, but for me, I was like, some of my favorite romantic lines were there. So when he says, when they cut off the lights at night, I run my fingers over your letters and try to read them like Braille. I thought that was so beautiful. And the letters start out with such longing and love for one another, and then they evolve differently as time goes by. Let's talk about the letters. Why did you choose to write the letters in this way, and what's your relationship with letters?
Well, I will say one thing about whether or not the novel is meant to be romantic. I think it's important that it is romantic because they are, in fact, a couple. And if it were not romantic, then that would be me letting the problem interfere with the people, you see. So I felt like the novel had to have the same standard of connection that you would have for any novel about a marriage, and not let the realities of this systemic racism eclipse the fact that these are two young people who want to be married to each other. I chose to use letters because, one, I write letters. I love letter writing, and I know that it's out of style. I feel like I'm one of the few people left that write letters, but people in prison, letters are very meaningful to people in prison for three reasons. One, obviously they want the information shared in the letter. Two, they appreciate it as a gesture that you took the time. And three, like with Roy, the letter itself is a souvenir of the relationship. Also, from a craft level, the letters allowed me to cover a lot of time quickly. I cover 5 years of his incarceration in about 80 pages. And the other thing is that prison, particularly in the US, there are two things. It's brutality and it's boredom. And those are two things that you don't want to experience vicariously as a reader or a writer. So with the letters, he curates his experiences for her. So we only know what he wants her to know. So we are spared the brutality. And because in a way he's sending almost like the highlights reel of his life, we're also spared the monotony of prison. So I had to look for small details that would give you the flavor of his experience without us having to actually live his experience.
Right. And over time, there's a bitterness that comes from him being stuck there and her being outside, and she is caring for him, but at the same time, life needs to go on because he is sentenced to 12 years at the beginning. And I love that at some point he was so desperate for her attention that she stopped visiting him for a little while, and he wasn't sure what to do, and so he reaches out to Celestial's father and asks him to step in and give him some answers or talk to Celestial for him. And I thought the Celestial's father's letter back to him was so beautiful. I'd love for you to read it.
Okay, I'd be glad to. Yes, he writes to Celestial's father. I feel that I feel that when Roy went to prison, he got very traditional in a way that he wasn't before. Like he's appealing to her father as though she's a child and her father can say, you know, you need to get there and do this or that.
Right.
And her father, he's torn because at once he is very dedicated to Roy, kind of from one Black man to another. But at the same time, Celestial is his only child. So the father writes, "Dear Roy, I am pleased to hear from you as I think of you often. My wife fancies herself as a prayer warrior, and she pleads with the Lord for you on a regular basis. No one here has forgotten you, not me, not my Gloria, not Celestial. Son," and I use this word deliberately, "I think you are misremembering our exchange when you came asking for Celestial's hand. I didn't refuse you. I merely explained to you that my daughter is not my property. I almost chuckled to remember it. You came here as proud as a peacock's daddy with that velvet box tucked in your jacket pocket. For one bewildered second, I thought you were about to propose to me." That's meant to be humor, by the way. "I was glad to see that you were serious in your intentions, but I didn't think I should see the ring before Celestial did. I could tell that your feelings were a little bruised when you left that day, and frankly, that was a positive development. You said in your letter that you were not accustomed to asking for things, and that was apparent, not from your gold cufflinks, authentic, who knew, but from the sway in your walk. You were not asking me for her hand, and I still assert that it was not mine to give. Instead, you were telling me that you were marrying her, and she hadn't even agreed. I surmised that your strategy was to get on your knee, whip out the ring, and I assumed it was a whopper, and announce that she had won the marriage sweepstakes. I was honest when I said that you didn't know her very well if you believed this approach would be successful. Here is an anecdote from my personal history. I proposed to Gloria 3 times before she said yes. The first instance, was admittedly a bit awkward as I was still encumbered with my first wife. Gloria is a refined woman, but these were her exact words: hell no. The second rejection was kinder: no, not yet. The third time, I wasn't down on my knees, neither literally nor metaphorically. I presented my modest token and asked her to share my life. I apologized for my transgressions. I laid myself low. I didn't involve her father, and I didn't ask her best friend to help me make the scene right. I took her hand, telling her the truth of my soul. She answered with a nod. It wasn't this hooting and hollering, jumping up and down you see on TV. None of this proposing via billboard or at halftime at a soccer match. Marriage is between 2 people. There is no studio audience. All that said, I will speak to Celestial about why it is that she has put her visiting schedule on hiatus. In the spirit of disclosure, I admit I was not aware of this until now, but I must make it clear that I cannot speak on your behalf. I can only talk to her on behalf of myself as her father. I hope you will not interpret this as rejection, because that is not my intention. You are part of our family, and every one of us holds you in the highest regard. I feel obligated to tell you that I will be sharing your letter with Celestial. I'm her father, and I cannot collude against her. She is the joy of my world and my only living blood relative. But I can tell you this: I know the sort of woman we have raised her to be. Her mother was loyal to me even when I did not deserve it, and I feel confident that my daughter will be no less steadfast. Please write to me again, son. I'm always happy to hear from you. Sincerely, Franklin Davenport. And then at the bottom, he says, CC, Celestial Davenport. So he copied her on the letter.
I thought that was a brilliant letter because it's so difficult as a father to be in that position, and the way that he responded for me was just perfect. It was I don't feel like a lot of fathers would respond this way, and I feel like he is so wise, and he is so he just, he was fair to him. That he could never say that he wasn't fair, and at the same time treating him like a son, but saying that his first loyalty is towards his daughter, and he will share this letter. And I thought he handled it so well. There was so much character that appeared in that letter about him.
He handled it so well until he didn't. He changed his mind. That's the thing. Like, as everyone has this idea of what type of person they think they're going to be in the face of the situation, but as time goes by, I feel like everyone's nerves just frayed and finally
Mm.
snapped.
Yeah. And that's the thing. She is expected from every direction to stay faithfully waiting for him for the 12 years. And maybe just freeze that part of her life, that romantic side of her life, maybe, or that partnership side of her life, freeze it until he's back 12 years later. And of course, there's a third character in the book, Andre, who is her best friend, and who is also the best man at the wedding. Um, but he is her best friend first. And
Yes.
then and then, in that time, he is comforting her, he grows closer with her,
And
and
one thing leads to another.
one thing leads to another. And an American Marriage was so special to me because my husband and I were invited to review it on the radio together. And
Oh,
so, yeah, and we read the book at the same time. And it was the only book actually that we've ever read at the same time, discussed heavily, like in private and then also on the radio. And, in the end, the radio host is like, okay, so are you Team Celeste or Team Roy? Like, what's going on? And then he's like, Team Roy. And I can't stand Andre.
men get so mad at Andre. I mean, they
I
get mad enough
know.
to fight.
I know. He's like, Andre is just every man's worst nightmare, that guy. And I was so angry with him. And I was like, you must get that reaction a lot. From your male readers. I feel like they
Yes.
feel that
Even
way.
like really nice, sensible, easygoing men, they get whipped up into a fine frenzy over Andre. And then there's some women, there
Yeah.
was an older woman, I was giving a talk in the city of Baltimore, and this older woman with her cane, she was shaking her cane at me. She was so angry. Had she not been on a cane, she would have come up on the stage.
Mm. Yeah, and you said this in a previous interview where you say everyone expects Celestial to almost give her life to Roy as a gesture, but she only has one life. And it's not that, she means to be disloyal to him or harm him. But what is it? Tell us
Well,
what's Celestial's side of the
her
story.
side of his, they were married only 18 months.
Hmm.
And he's in prison. And this is something that happens a lot in the US. People will be in prison 800 miles away from their family. So the journey to take care of him is so immense. And she's an artist. Her career is happening. She wants from her life the same thing I want from my life, the same thing you want from your life. She wants from her life what everyone wants. And the idea is that she should be preserved in amber kind of as a gesture, yes, as a gesture to his suffering. And she supports him. She and her family, they pay for his legal bills. I love to point out that if it were not for Celestial, he would still be in jail. But
Yeah.
they act like she can somehow, I don't know, they want this gesture. It's this story as old as the Odyssey, just this idea. And they say that when a man goes to prison, his wife goes to prison too, but that's actually not true. Only the person in prison is in prison. And that is where the tension is in their relationship. Her life is moving forward, his is not.
Hmm.
And the question for me, and I was writing this, is it more selfish for her to want her life to move forward, or is it selfish for him to want her life not to move forward? There's a
Right.
moment when he says to her early in the book, he says, I don't want you to wait for me. And she says, his eyes and his words were saying two different things, like someone saying no while nodding their head yes.
Mm. That's right. That's very true. So we won't talk a lot more about the story because, you know, everybody should, if you haven't read the book, you should go get the book and see for yourself what happens throughout the story when Roy comes home. It's a beautiful book. Um, so I wanted to ask you this. I was having this conversation with an author friend recently whose work has also suddenly become hugely successful, and she's gained this sort of world recognition now. And she was telling me that she sometimes feels like one person in her head, And then she is another person that the entire world is now seeing, and she feels like they're two separate people. Do you relate to this feeling? And I want to talk about like when you got the call from Oprah and how that changed your career and everything. And what do you think about that?
Well, I was lucky to have been writing a long time before this happened to me. And so I was pretty clear of what I do and why.
Yeah.
So I do feel that it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun, this new public life. So many things that I always wanted to do, like, come to the UAE for the festival, because I knew other people had gone, and now I was there, and now I'm here virtually. And it felt like it was a very satisfying reward for 20 years of hard work. And that has been nice, but when it comes time to write the next book, that's when you have to remember who you are. Because every writer, whether you're successful or not successful, when you come time to write the same book, everyone feels anxiety. If you've written books and they have not been successful, you may say, oh, what's the use? Why should I write another one? And when you have been successful, you think, can I do that again? Is everyone going to be disappointed? It's all this worry, and you have to let it go and remember that creativity is a gift from God. God is the creator, and we mimic God when we create. And you have to remember that calling and that thing and not worry about how the world feels. But I can imagine, but it is very disruptive. Like, I got recognized in the airport. I was having a tantrum because I have this thing where I'm not supposed to have to show my ID. And they kept asking me for my ID. And I had this tantrum. I said, I fly 3 days a week. I was having a full tantrum. And the woman said, oh, we read your book in my book club. And then I felt so embarrassed. And I was like, oh, I'm really usually a very nice person. That was just a new thing. That was a moment of adjusting to the idea that someone knows who I am. Or all these things happen in airports. I was in Heathrow and I saw my book way on the table across the room. And I said, I must be so sleepy. How did I leave my book all the way there? And when it was time for me to leave to get the plane, I walked over and picked the book up. And a man took my hand and said, why are you taking my book? And I said, it's my book. And it was because my brain had not caught up with my experience yet.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. So, but tell us about Oprah and how that happened. And
Oprah is mysterious. Oprah is mysterious. You don't really know how it happens.
Did she get the book in advance from the publisher?
Oprah is Oprah.
She gets what she wants where she wants.
The book was about 5 months before publication. And I got a phone call from a blocked caller. And I said, hello. And she said, hey, this is Oprah. And I said, ma'am. And she said, I've read your book and I would like to use it for my book club. And I said, my book isn't out. I mean, it wasn't even in galleys. It was only in manuscript form. I said, my book isn't out yet. And she said, people give me things. And I said, I guess they do. But I had to keep it secret for 5 months. And that 5 months was a great blessing because I had a lot of time to think about it. What does it mean? How will I feel? I was very worried because I had signed these non-disclosures, I couldn't tell anyone. And just imagine when the book was announced, everyone would say, you didn't tell me. It would make your friends feel like they're not your friends. So what I did was the night before the announcement, I told everyone, tune in to, to this station at this time because something exciting is happening. So they would at least feel like I told them.
Yeah.
And that to me was the first precursor to the fact that my life had changed. That I had to constantly remember how to nurture my existing relationships. Because people will say, you've changed.
Yeah.
I have not. I am the same. I am the same.
But do you know anyone else who's had the Oprah call? And did you discuss it?
I'm so lucky. Yes. My first writing teacher, whom I met when I was just a teenager in the 90s, she had an Oprah book club pick. And I called her. That's the one person I broke the agreement. And I was afraid because you don't want to be breaking agreements with Oprah. But I called her and told her, And she told me what to expect. And she was the one who told me to make sure that I nurture my relationships in advance. She said, your life is going to change. You're not going to have time for people. And you need them to know that you do love them, because you're going to, she says, because when all the noise dies down, you're going to need your existing friends. And so that was it was amazing. I mean, I never had anything like that happen to me. Like before that, I had never even won a raffle. Like I've tried to win a raffle when I was a little girl. I saved all my money for the raffle tickets. I did not win. I'm still angry about that.
It's okay. I think the universe has made it up now.
And also just the idea of Oprah, she's such a nice person. And the idea that she lent her good name and changed my life and never asked for anything in return.
That's amazing. Well, you deserved it for sure, and deserve more. I mean, your work is such a joy to read. Honestly, I just enjoy it all throughout. So it's you definitely deserve that. I have one last question to ask you, and then maybe we'll open up to any questions from the audience. Of all the characters that you've written, who is your favorite and why?
I'm gonna say that my favorite is probably Dana from Silver Sparrow, because I like her voice and I like how determined she is to make her life her own life. And I think the message of what happens to her is that the truth is reward enough. Like some people say, oh, she didn't have a happy ending. I said, but she did, because she can live a life as a free person. And isn't that what we all want, to be free?
Beautiful. Beautiful. That's great. And so let me just have a quick look here and see if there's any questions from the audience. I know that there was some technical difficulties earlier with Q&As. Have a quick look right here. If the organizers who are here could let us know if there are any questions in the back end or any questions from the live audience, that would be wonderful. Okay, here it is. So we have a question. What would your best advice be for new writers, and where can they start?
Start wherever you are. You don't have to start at the beginning. Like I said before, some people, you get so worried that you don't know how to start it and then you don't start it, but just jump in anywhere. I say write the parts of the story that are interesting to you, because sometimes you think, okay, I know, like, for example, you know there's going to be a fire in the story and you're trying to write leading up to the fire. Just start with the fire. The flames are creeping up, you know, the curtains are ablaze. Start writing there. You can fill in that other stuff later, because the excitement you get from writing the parts that are exciting to you will propel you to write the rest. Also, you know how people tell writers you have to write every day? A writer writes every day. You do not have to write every day. So many people don't write their book because they feel they don't have every day to write. Let's say they have to work. Let's say they are mothers. Let's say they're taking care of the elderly. They're doing things. Let's say they're saving democracy, for example, which is something that needs to be done. They may feel they don't have time to write their book, but all these other things you do, this mothering, this taking care of elders, this working, this saving democracy, this is what is going to make your book good. It's going to take you longer because you don't have to work on it. You don't have time every day, but it's going to be better. So the things that you think of as impediments to your work, these are actually your superpower. And so try to make a schedule for yourself that you can keep easily. So let's say you write 3 days a week for 1 hour, the amount of time that other people spend in the gym. That is enough time to move your project forward. And it builds momentum as it goes.
Wonderful. There is another question. When is the next book coming out? We all want to know.
I also want to know, but I was working on it this morning and it's starting to feel good to me. Like I said, I had such a hard time writing again after everything we've been through. but now I feel like I was working on it today. I realized I had a point of view issue, and it was good to diagnose a problem and start to fix it. I feel like we're blooming. Before, I started keeping orchids because they don't bloom for a long time. And I forced myself to keep nurturing the orchids because I wasn't blooming, but I deserve, sunlight and water. And then yesterday, one of the orchids made a little bud, and I thought, we're back.
That's such a good feeling. I do that too. I always keep the orchid stem and nurture them.
And they take so long. Like orchids really, you have to learn patience, and you have to learn to respect life because it is alive, not because it is a bloom.
Beautiful. So we have a comment here. No question here. Just want to say that every sentence you said was so beautiful. It was an honor listening to you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
And then we have a question that says, what's your favorite pastime for self-care?
This term self-care has come up a lot. And I had to really, make myself learn the difference between pampering and self-care. Like, I don't think that getting my nails done is self-care, or, doing something to my hair. I feel like corporations are selling me things like, buy this lipstick and you'll be self-care. I have learned the best thing for self-care is to disconnect my devices and spend 30 minutes at least reading. Just reading something, because it forces me to be immersed in something else, and I'm consuming art, and it reminds me of the life that I had before everything happened and I could no longer concentrate. So I sit and I read. And you know what else I do? I reward myself. Like, if I am able to write, every time I write 20 pages, I reward myself by ordering flowers, and I sit them. You can't see them now, but they're right over there. So when I'm sitting here at my desk, I look at them and I'm reminded of the wonder of the world, the beauty of creation, and that nurtures me and keeps me going. Also, get your sleep. Sleep is the most important. If you don't sleep, you start to fall apart, and you don't know why, and it's because you're exhausted.
Absolutely. It's so important. I think that's all the time we have today for questions, and that brings us to the end of this session. So I'd like to say a big thank you to our audience for joining us in person or virtually at the Abu Dhabi International Book Fair. And I'd also like to say thank you to the Arabic Language Center for organizing the book fair, the AV team and volunteers, the translators for this event, and the wonderful Dr. Tayari Jones for such an enjoyable session. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. And we're waiting for you to come back in person, inshallah, very soon.
Yes, I hope so. And thank you for having me. It's been lovely. And it's great that we've bookended this, because when we saw each other last, it was right at the start of the pandemic. And now here we are.
Yeah, hopefully the end. Hopefully the end very soon.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Great to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.